The charity gala was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the mansion's ballroom, where 300 of the city's elite mingled over champagne and small talk about tax write-offs. As the museum's events coordinator, I'd spent 6 months planning every detail of this fundraiser. Tonight was supposed to be my triumph. "Thalassa, darling, the silent auction is performing beautifully," gushed Margaret Whitfield, our biggest donor. "You've outdone yourself," I smiled graciously, adjusting my emerald dress. "Thank you, Margaret. We're hoping to raise enough for the new Renaissance wing." Across the room, my husband Caleb stood in a circle of suits, his face wearing that familiar mask of polite attention. At 37, he still commanded attention. Tall, dark-haired, with those sharp grey eyes that missed nothing. His work as a crisis PR consultant had taught him to read people like open books. Sometimes I felt like he was reading me too closely. "Caleb seems distracted tonight," Margaret observed, following my gaze. Before I could respond, Caleb's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, excused himself from his conversation, and walked over to us. "Ladies, I apologize, but I need to step out for a work call. Senator Morrison's campaign is having a crisis that can't wait." He kissed my cheek perfunctorily. "I'll be back in 30 minutes. I watched him disappear into the mansion's corridors, probably heading to the library for privacy. The familiar pang of resentment hit me. Even at my event, work came first. "Duty calls," I murmured to Margaret, who nodded sympathetically. "Men and their careers," she sighed. "At least he supports your work." "Does he?" I wondered. Caleb attended my events, smiled at the right moments, wrote the checks. But when was the last time he'd actually listened when I talked about my projects? When had he last looked at me the way he looked at his crisis management files? I excused myself and headed toward the bar, needing something stronger than champagne. That's when I saw Elliot Crane polishing glasses behind the mahogany counter. At 29, he had that effortless charm that made everyone feel like his best friend. His dark hair was perfectly tousled, and his smile could disarm anyone. "Mrs. Vey," he said, his voice warm. "How's the guest of honor holding up?" "Surviving," I laughed, though I could use something to take the edge off. "Whiskey sour, I remember from the museum opening last month." The fact that he remembered sent a little thrill through me. "You have a good memory." "For beautiful women who appreciate good cocktails." His eyes held mine a beat longer than necessary. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. When was the last time Caleb had complimented me like that? When was the last time anyone had made me feel seen? "Actually," Elliot continued, lowering his voice, "I've been hoping to get a moment alone with you all evening." My pulse quickened. "Oh?" "There's a private study upstairs. The host showed me earlier when I was setting up. Beautiful view of the gardens. Much quieter than down here." I glanced around the ballroom. Caleb would be on his call for at least half an hour. No one would miss me for a few minutes. "Lead the way," I heard myself saying. We slipped up the curved staircase, past oil paintings of long-dead philanthropists. The study was exactly as Elliot had described, elegant, intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking moonlit gardens. He closed the door behind us. "This is lovely," I said, suddenly aware of how alone we were. "Not as lovely as you." He moved closer, his hand brushing mine. "I've been thinking about you since the museum event. The way you commanded that room, the passion in your voice when you talked about the art collection." My breath caught. "Elliot, tell me you haven't felt this too, this connection." I should have left then, should have remembered my marriage, my daughter, my reputation. Instead, I let him pull me closer, let him kiss me with the hunger I'd forgotten existed. Minutes passed in a blur of whispered words and stolen touches. His hands tangled in my hair, messing the careful updo I'd spent an hour perfecting. My lipstick smeared across his collar. We were reckless, desperate, lost in the moment. The door opened without warning. Caleb stood in the doorway, his phone still in his hand. His face was perfectly calm, but I knew that look. It was the same expression he wore when analyzing a client's scandal. Detached, calculating, memorizing every detail. "Oh," I gasped, stepping back from Elliot. "Caleb, Excuse me," Caleb said quietly. His eyes swept the room, taking in my disheveled hair, Elliot's rumpled shirt, the guilt written across both our faces. I was looking for a quiet place to finish my call. Elliot cleared his throat nervously. "We were just—" "No explanation necessary," Caleb interrupted smoothly. "I'll find somewhere else." He backed out and closed the door with a soft click. The silence that followed was deafening. "Jesus," Elliot whispered. "Do you think he knows?" I stared at the closed door, my heart hammering. Caleb's voice had been perfectly level, his manner unruffled, but I'd seen something flicker in those grey eyes, something cold and calculating that made my blood freeze. "I don't know," I whispered back, but deep down, I knew the truth. Caleb missed nothing, and whatever he'd just witnessed, he was already 3 steps ahead of me. The drive home was silent except for the hum of Caleb's BMW on the highway. I stole glances at his profile, searching for any sign of what he was thinking. His hands were steady on the wheel, his expression neutral. It was more unnerving than if he'd been screaming. "The gala was a success," I finally ventured. "We raised over 200,000. "Congratulations," he replied evenly. "Your hard work paid off." His tone was perfectly pleasant, which somehow made it worse. I knew Caleb well enough to recognize when he was operating in crisis mode, calm, collected, and dangerous. At home, our daughter Piper was already asleep. My sister Naomi had stayed to babysit, and she looked up from her magazine when we entered. "How was the party?" she asked brightly. "Did the museum crowd behave themselves?" "Wonderfully," I said, forcing enthusiasm. "The auction exceeded expectations." "That's fantastic, Thal." Naomi gathered her purse. "Piper was an angel. She's excited about the school field trip to your museum next week." After Naomi left, Caleb disappeared into his home office without a word. I stood in our living room, staring at the closed door, my mind racing. What was he doing in there? What was he thinking? I tried to rationalize what had happened. Caleb had walked in on what could have been an innocent conversation. Yes, Elliot and I had been standing close, and yes, my hair was messed up, but that didn't prove anything. Maybe I was overthinking this. Over the next few days, Caleb's behavior remained perfectly normal on the surface. He made coffee in the morning, kissed me goodbye, asked about my day when he came home. But something fundamental had shifted. The kisses were perfunctory, the questions felt like data collection, and those grey eyes seemed to be cataloguing my every move. He started working later, often retreating to the guest room with his laptop after dinner. When I asked about it, he claimed he was organizing old case files. "Spring cleaning," he said with that same pleasant tone. "You know how I hate clutter." I tried to peek over his shoulder once, but he closed the laptop smoothly. "Confidential client information," he explained. "You understand?" My paranoia grew. At work, I found myself jumping every time my phone rang, expecting Caleb's voice with pointed questions. But the calls never came. Instead, there was just that terrible, watchful silence. A week after the gala, I ran into Elliot at a coffee shop near the museum. My heart raced when I saw him, a mixture of guilt and attraction I couldn't suppress. "Thalassa," he said, approaching my table. "Mind if I sit?" I glanced around nervously. "Just for a minute." He slid into the chair across from me, his usual confidence dimmed. "I've been thinking about what happened, about your husband walking in." "It was nothing," I said quickly. "He didn't see anything." "Are you sure? Because I've been getting some strange vibes at work. My manager asked me about the gala, wanted to know if there were any incidents he should be aware of." A chill ran down my spine. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, obviously, but it felt like someone had been asking questions." I forced a laugh. "You're being paranoid. Caleb's not the type to make a scene. He's too controlled for that. But even as I said it, I remembered his background. Before becoming a crisis PR consultant, Caleb had worked in counterintelligence for the government. He knew how to gather information quietly, how to build cases without anyone knowing they were being investigated. Maybe we should cool things off for a while, Elliot suggested, just until— There's nothing to cool off, I interrupted, louder than intended. A few other customers glanced our way. We had a conversation at a party, that's all. Elliot studied my face. Is it? Because it felt like more than that to me. Heat flushed my cheeks. The truth was, I hadn't been able to stop thinking about those moments in the study. The way Elliot had looked at me, touched me, made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. My marriage had become a series of polite interactions and shared responsibilities. When was the last time Caleb had kissed me with passion? When had he last made me feel desired rather than simply tolerated? I should go, I said, standing abruptly. This was a mistake. But as I walked away, I could feel Elliot's eyes on me, and I knew this wasn't over. That night, I found Caleb in the guest room again, surrounded by manila folders and printed documents. His laptop screen showed what looked like spreadsheets and timestamps. "What are you working on?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Just organizing some old files. Nothing that would interest you." "It's almost midnight, Caleb. Come to bed." "I'll be there soon," he replied, but his attention was already back on the papers. I lingered for a moment, trying to see what he was reviewing, but the angle was wrong. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. A printout with the gala venue's letterhead. "Caleb," I said carefully, "is that from the museum fundraiser?" His fingers stilled on the papers. "Just some follow-up documentation. Liability insurance, that sort of thing." I wanted to push, to demand answers, but something in his tone warned me off. Instead, I retreated to our bedroom, my mind spinning with questions and fears. As I lay awake listening for Caleb's footsteps, I realized that the comfortable predictability of our marriage had been shattered. Whatever game we were playing now, the rules had changed completely, and I was terrified that I was already losing. 2 weeks later, my carefully constructed sense of security crumbled completely. I was reviewing vendor contracts in my museum office when my phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. "Need to talk, urgent, meet me at Riverside Cafe in an hour." The tone was unlike his usual flirtatious messages. Something was wrong. I found him at a corner table, his normally confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. His hand shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. "Thank you for coming," he said without his usual smile. "What's wrong? You look terrible." Elliot glanced around the cafe nervously. "We have a problem. A big one." My stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Your husband contacted me yesterday, through official channels." "What do you mean, official channels?" Elliot's voice dropped to a whisper. "I do some work for the police department. Information gathering, you know. Nothing major, just keeping my ears open at events, reporting anything suspicious. It helps pay the bills." I stared at him. "You're a police informant?" "It's not like that sounds. I just pass along tips about drug deals, money laundering, that kind of thing. Anyway, your husband somehow found out about my connection to the department. He called my handler." The cafe suddenly felt too warm. "And said what?" "He didn't make any accusations. He was very professional, very calm. He just said he had some questions about my work at the gala and wondered if we could have a conversation." "Did you talk to him?" Elliot nodded miserably. "I didn't have a choice. When the police want to talk, you talk. And your husband." "Jesus, Thalassa, he's scary when he wants to be. He knew things." "What kind of things?" "Details about that night. About us being in the study together. About how long we were up there. About the state of our clothes when we came down." Elliot's voice cracked. "He had it all mapped out like a crime scene." I felt dizzy. "What did you tell him?" The truth, I had to. He made it clear that lying would be a very bad idea. Elliot leaned forward desperately. Thalassa, he knows about the other times too. What other times? But even as I asked, I knew what he meant. The museum opening last month, the wine tasting at the gallery, that afternoon at my apartment when you said you were at a vendor meeting. Elliot's words came out in a rush. He has dates, times, everything. How could he know all that? My mind raced back over the past 6 months. All those little lies I'd told Caleb about working late or meeting vendors. All those stolen moments with Elliot that had felt so secret, so safe. How had Caleb been tracking my movements without me knowing? He asked me to sign a statement, Elliot continued, a formal declaration of everything that happened between us. You didn't sign anything, did you? Elliot's silence was answer enough. Oh, God. I buried my face in my hands. What exactly did you tell him? Everything. The whole 6 months. How you initiated contact after the museum opening. How we've been meeting regularly. How you paid me for private bartending sessions that weren't really about bartending. His voice was barely audible now. He has bank records, Thalassa. He knows about the money. The money. I'd been so careful about that, or so I thought. Taking cash from our joint account in small amounts, telling Caleb it was for event expenses and vendor tips, $12,000 over 6 months, paid to Elliot for private tastings and consultation fees. Money that had really been for his time, his attention, his willingness to make me feel special. He's building a case against you, Elliot said. I don't know what he's planning, but this isn't just about catching a cheating wife. This is something bigger. I thought about Caleb's late nights in the guest room, the folders and spreadsheets, the way he'd been watching me with those analytical eyes. He wasn't just hurt or angry, he was conducting an investigation. There's more, Elliot said reluctantly. He mentioned that my work with the police could be affected if there were any questions about my integrity or judgment. He threatened your job. Not directly. He's too smart for that. But the implication was clear. If word gets out that I've been involved with a married client, my credibility as an informant is shot. I could lose everything. I stared at him across the table, seeing clearly for the first time. Elliot wasn't my romantic escape. He was a young man who'd gotten in over his head with a married woman and was now facing real consequences. The power dynamic I'd enjoyed, the way I'd made him dependent on my payments, suddenly looked sordid and manipulative. I'm sorry, I whispered. I never meant for this to happen. I know, but it did happen, and now we both have to deal with it. Elliot stood up abruptly. I can't see you anymore, Thalassa. I can't even talk to you. My lawyer says any further contact could make things worse. Your lawyer? Your husband suggested I might want to get one. For my protection, he said. Elliot's laugh was bitter. Funny how helpful he's being. After he left, I sat alone in the cafe, my coffee growing cold as I tried to process what I'd learned. Caleb hadn't just discovered my affair. He'd systematically dismantled it. He'd turned my lover into a witness against me, documented our relationship with the precision of a federal investigation, and somehow done it all without me suspecting a thing. The man I'd married was more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, and I was completely at his mercy. That evening, I tried to act normal as Caleb and I went through our usual dinner routine with Piper. Our 7-year-old chattered about her school day, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling between her parents. "Mummy, are you okay?" Piper asked, noticing I'd barely touched my food. "You look sad." "Just tired, sweetheart," I managed. "Mommy has a lot of work to do." Caleb's eyes met mine across the table. "Perhaps you should take some time to rest. Clear your head." The words were innocent enough, but his tone carried an undertone that made my skin crawl. After dinner, he disappeared into his office again, while I helped Piper with homework and got her ready for bed. Once Piper was asleep, I found myself standing outside Caleb's office door, listening to the soft clicking of his keyboard. What was he compiling in there? How much evidence did he have? I needed to know what I was dealing with. The next day, while Caleb was at work and Piper was at school, I searched our apartment methodically. I started with his office, but the filing cabinets were locked and his laptop was password protected. I tried our anniversary, Piper's birthday, even his mother's maiden name, but nothing worked. Then I remembered the guest room where he'd been spending so many late nights. Hidden under a stack of legitimate client files, I found it, a thick binder labeled Documentation Personal Matter. My hands shook as I opened it. The first section contained printouts from our home's smart lock system. I'd forgotten that Caleb had installed the high-tech locks last year for security. Every time someone entered or left our apartment, the system logged it with a timestamp and entry method. The records showed Elliot's visits with devastating clarity. Dates: when I'd told Caleb I was working late, the logs showed Elliot entering our apartment with the temporary access code I'd given him. Times when Caleb was traveling for business, Elliot was there for hours. The second section was financial records. Bank statements with highlighted withdrawals, all coded as event expenses or vendor payments. $12,000 over 6 months, just as Elliot had said. But Caleb had cross-referenced these withdrawals with my actual work calendar, showing that many of the supposed vendor meetings had occurred on days when I had no scheduled events. The third section made my blood run cold. Venue contracts and catering agreements, all bearing Elliot's signature as the contracted bartender. But these weren't for museum events. They were for private tastings at upscale locations around the city. Events that had never appeared on any museum calendar, paid for with our joint account funds. I remembered those afternoons now with sickening clarity, how I'd convinced myself I was exploring new venues for future museum events, how I'd rationalized the expense as professional development. The truth was uglier. I'd been paying for elaborate dates, using museum business as cover for my affair. The fourth section contained witness statements, not just from Elliot, but from venue managers, catering staff, even valet attendants, all describing the same pattern: Mrs. Vey and the bartender arriving separately, spending hours in private rooms, leaving together looking disheveled. How had Caleb gotten all these people to talk? Then I remembered his background in counterintelligence, his current work in crisis management. He knew how to interview witnesses, how to gather information without revealing his purpose. The final section was the most damning. Security camera footage from various venues, printed as still images with timestamps. Me entering hotel bars alone. Elliot following minutes later. Both of us leaving together hours later. In one image, his hand was clearly on my lower back. In another, we were kissing in what I'd thought was a secluded corridor. I'd been so careful, or so I'd thought. But Caleb had reconstructed our entire affair with the precision of a federal investigation. Every lie I'd told was documented. Every secret meeting was recorded. Every dollar I'd spent was accounted for. At the very back of the binder was a single sheet of paper, a timeline of our marriage over the past year. It showed Caleb's business trips, my supposed work events, and Elliot's documented presence in our lives. The pattern was undeniable. Every time Caleb was out of town, every time I'd claimed to be working late, I'd been with Elliot instead. But what chilled me most was a handwritten note in Caleb's precise script: pattern established, financial documentation complete, witness statements obtained, ready for next phase. Next phase of what? I heard the apartment door open and quickly shoved the binder back where I'd found it. Caleb's voice called from the entryway. "Thalassa, are you home?" "In the bedroom," I called back, trying to sound normal. He appeared in the doorway, still in his suit from work. "How was your day?" "Fine," I said, avoiding his eyes. "Quiet. I caught up on some paperwork." "Good. It's important to stay organized." He loosened his tie, his movements casual. I'll be working late again tonight. Some new developments in a case that require immediate attention. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As he headed toward the guest room, I wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand to know what he was planning. But I was trapped by my own guilt. Everything in that binder was true. I had lied, cheated, and stolen from our marriage. Whatever Caleb was planning, I'd given him all the ammunition he needed. That night, I lay awake listening to him working in the next room. The soft sounds of typing, the rustle of papers, the occasional phone call conducted in voices too low for me to understand. I was living with a stranger who knew all my secrets while I knew none of his. And with each passing hour, I became more certain that when Caleb finally made his move, I wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The first crack in my carefully maintained facade came at Piper's school. I was picking her up from her after-school program when Mrs. Henderson, her teacher, asked to speak with me privately. "I wanted to check in about how things are going at home," she said gently. "Piper seems a bit anxious lately. She's been asking a lot of questions about divorce and what happens when families change." My stomach dropped. "Has she said something specific?" "Nothing concrete, but she mentioned that Daddy has been sleeping in the guest room and that you and Daddy don't talk much anymore. Children are very perceptive about these things." I forced a smile. "We're just going through a busy period with work, nothing for Piper to worry about." Mrs. Henderson nodded, but her expression remained concerned. "Of course, but if you need any resources for family counseling or support services, please don't hesitate to ask." The drive home was silent except for Piper's occasional questions about why I seemed upset. How could I explain that her world was about to implode because of choices I'd made? That weekend, Caleb's parents came for their monthly dinner. Greta and Arthur Vey were traditional people who'd been married for 40 years. They'd always been polite to me, but I'd never felt like they truly approved of their son's choice in wives. "Thalassa looks tired," Greta observed quietly to Caleb while I was in the kitchen preparing dessert. "Is she feeling all right?" "She's been working very hard," Caleb replied evenly. "Perhaps too hard." When I returned with coffee, the conversation felt stilted. Arthur, usually chatty about his golf games and book club, seemed withdrawn. Greta kept glancing between Caleb and me with barely concealed worry. "Piper, why don't you show Grandma your art project?" Caleb suggested. As Piper dragged Greta toward her bedroom, Arthur leaned forward. "Son, is everything all right? Your mother's been worried." "Everything's fine, Dad. Just some work stress." Arthur's eyes found mine. "Marriage requires constant attention, you know. It's easy to take each other for granted." The words felt like an accusation. Did they know something? Had Caleb told them? After his parents left, Caleb announced he'd be spending the next weekend at a conference in Chicago. "Crisis management seminar," he explained. 3 days of workshops and networking. I nodded, but something felt off. Caleb usually discussed his travel plans weeks in advance. This seemed sudden, almost spontaneous. The Monday after Caleb's trip, my sister Naomi called with an unusual request. "Can we have lunch today? I need to talk to you about something." We met at a small bistro near the museum. Naomi looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her napkin as we ordered. "I heard something disturbing yesterday," she finally said, "at Sarah's baby shower." Sarah was a mutual friend who worked in event planning. Our social circles overlapped significantly. "What kind of something?" "There are rumors, Thal, about you and some bartender, about inappropriate behavior at work events." Naomi's voice was careful, controlled. "Please tell me it's just gossip." My face burned. "Who's saying these things?" "It doesn't matter who. What matters is whether they're true." I wanted to lie, to deflect, to blame jealous colleagues and malicious gossip. But looking at my sister's worried face, I couldn't find the words. "Oh, Thalassa," Naomi whispered, "what have you done?" The story came pouring out. My loneliness in the marriage, my connection with Elliot, the months of secret meetings. I painted myself as the victim of a cold, distant husband who'd driven me to seek affection elsewhere. Naomi listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "Does Caleb know?" she asked when I finished. "I think so. He's been acting strange, distant, but he hasn't said anything directly. Thalassa, you need to end this immediately. Think about Piper. Think about your reputation." "I already ended it. Elliot won't even talk to me anymore." "Good. Now you need to focus on saving your marriage." But even as Naomi spoke about counseling and second chances, I could see the judgment in her eyes. My sister, who'd always looked up to me, was seeing me clearly for the first time. Over the next few days, the social isolation intensified. Colleagues who'd once sought my opinion on projects suddenly seemed too busy to chat. Invitations to after-work drinks stopped coming. The museum's director, who'd praised my work just weeks earlier, now communicated through terse emails. The breaking point came at a fundraising committee meeting. As I presented plans for the spring gala, I noticed several board members exchanging glances. When I finished, the room was uncomfortably quiet. "Thank you, Thalassa," the director said finally. "We'll review your proposal and get back to you." After the meeting, Margaret Whitfield, our biggest donor, approached me in the parking lot. "My dear, I feel I should warn you. There's been unpleasant talk about your conduct at recent events." Her voice was kind but firm. "The museum's reputation is paramount. I trust you understand." I understood perfectly. My professional life was crumbling just as thoroughly as my personal one. That evening, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter addressed to both Caleb and me. Inside was a formal invitation to a mediation session scheduled for the following Friday at 2 p.m. The location was listed as the Riverside Foundation's donor boardroom, a venue I recognized as one of the city's most prestigious non-profit spaces. "What's this about?" I asked Caleb when he emerged from his office. He glanced at the invitation calmly. "I thought it was time we had a conversation about our future, in a neutral setting, with proper documentation." "Documentation? Caleb, this sounds like a business meeting, not marriage counseling." "Perhaps that's what we need right now. A business-like approach to resolving our differences." His tone was perfectly reasonable, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Will there be other people there?" "A mediator, certainly. Perhaps a few others who have relevant information to share." "What kind of information?" Caleb's grey eyes met mine steadily. "The kind that will help us determine the best path forward, for everyone involved." As he walked away, I stared at the invitation with growing dread. This wasn't a reconciliation attempt. This was something else entirely. And whatever Caleb had planned for that boardroom, I was walking into it completely blind. The trap was closing around me, and there was nowhere left to run. Friday arrived with unseasonable rain, matching my mood as I drove to the Riverside Foundation building. The donor boardroom was on the 20th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Under normal circumstances, I might have admired the elegant conference table and leather chairs. Today, they felt like a courtroom. I arrived precisely at 2 p.m., expecting to find Caleb and a marriage counselor waiting. Instead, I walked into something that looked more like a deposition. Caleb sat at one end of the polished table, flanked by a woman in a severe grey suit who was clearly an attorney. Across from them sat a man I didn't recognize, also in legal attire. At the head of the table was an older woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as the mediator. But what made my blood freeze were the other people in the room. Greta and Arthur sat in chairs along the wall, their faces grave. Naomi was there too, looking like she wanted to disappear. And in the corner, taking notes, was a court reporter. "Please sit down, Thalassa," the mediator said gently, indicating the chair directly across from Caleb. "What is this?" I demanded, remaining standing. "This isn't what we discussed." "Please sit," Caleb's attorney said firmly. "We have a great deal to cover." I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly weak. On the table in front of Caleb was the binder I'd discovered in the guest room, along with several other folders I'd never seen. "This is a formal mediation session," the mediator explained, "called to address issues of marital misconduct, financial impropriety, and child welfare concerns. Mr. Vey has requested this forum to present evidence of sustained deceptive behavior and to propose a path forward that protects all parties involved." "Evidence?" My voice came out as a croak. Caleb's attorney opened the binder. "Mrs. Vey, we have documentation of a 6-month extramarital affair conducted using marital assets, involving deception about your whereabouts, and creating potential security risks given your husband's profession." She began reading from Elliot's signed statement. Every detail of our relationship was laid bare: the initial flirtation, the private meetings, the money I'd paid him, the lies I'd told. Hearing it read aloud in legal language made it sound sordid and calculated. "This is ridiculous," I interrupted. "A marriage isn't a criminal case." "You're right," Caleb spoke for the first time, his voice calm. "But theft of marital assets is a civil matter. Fraud in financial transactions is a legal concern. And when someone in my position has their personal life compromised, it becomes a professional issue as well." His attorney continued, presenting the smart lock records, the bank statements, the venue contracts. Each piece of evidence was methodically explained and entered into the record. The court reporter's fingers never stopped moving. "Furthermore," the attorney said, "we have testimony from venue staff documenting Mrs. Vey's inappropriate conduct at professional events, potentially damaging her employer's reputation and creating liability issues." I looked desperately around the room. Greta was staring at her hands, tears in her eyes. Arthur's face was stone. Naomi wouldn't meet my gaze. "The financial analysis shows $12,000 in marital funds diverted for personal use without spousal consent," the attorney continued. "Money that was coded as business expenses, but used to facilitate an extramarital relationship." "I can pay it back," I said quickly. "It was just—" "Mrs. Vey," the mediator interrupted gently, "please let the presentation finish." The worst was yet to come. Caleb's attorney produced a new folder containing documents I'd never seen. During Mr. Vey's recent business travel, we conducted additional investigation into Mrs. Vey's activities. Security footage from multiple venues confirms the pattern of deception. Credit card records show charges at hotels and restaurants on days when Mrs. Vey claimed to be working late. Images flashed before me: hotel receipts, restaurant bills, parking garage tickets, all from afternoons I'd spent with Elliot, all paid for with our joint credit card. I'd been so focused on hiding the cash payments that I'd forgotten about the other expenses. Additionally, the attorney continued, we have statements from Mrs. Vey's workplace indicating that her professional conduct has become a concern for her employer. A letter from the museum director was read aloud, expressing serious concerns about staff conduct and mentioning an investigation into potential misuse of institutional resources. I was being destroyed systematically, professionally and personally, in front of my family. The final concern, Caleb's attorney said, involves the welfare of the minor child. Mrs. Vey's deceptive behavior has created an unstable home environment. The child has exhibited signs of anxiety and has been asking questions about family dissolution. You can't use Piper against me, I said desperately. I'm her mother. No one is questioning your love for your daughter, the mediator said, but we must consider what arrangement serves her best interests. Caleb's attorney slid a thick document across the table. These are the proposed terms for dissolution of the marriage, division of assets, and custody arrangements. My hands shook as I tried to read the legal language. The terms were devastating. Caleb would retain the apartment and primary custody of Piper. I would be required to repay the $12,000 plus interest. My visitation would be supervised initially, pending psychological evaluation. This is insane, I said, looking directly at Caleb for the first time. You're destroying our family over a mistake. His grey eyes were completely cold. I'm not destroying anything, Thalassa. I'm documenting what you've already destroyed and ensuring it doesn't happen again. The affair is over. I told you that. We can work through this. Can we work through 6 months of systematic deception? Can we work through $12,000 in theft? Can we work through the security risk you created by involving someone with police connections in our personal life? I hadn't even considered that angle. Elliot's work as a police informant, his access to information about investigations and law enforcement activities. By involving him in our lives, I'd potentially compromised Caleb's work with sensitive clients. I didn't know about his police work, I said weakly. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw what you wanted to see. The mediator intervened. Mrs. Vey, you have the right to legal representation before responding to these proposals. I don't need a lawyer, I said desperately. I need my husband to remember that he loves me. Caleb's expression didn't change. I remember loving the woman I thought I married, but that woman apparently never existed. The attorney placed another document on the table. These are restraining order papers, preventing Mrs. Vey from contacting Mr. Crane or interfering with his employment. Violation will result in criminal charges. And this, she added, producing yet another folder, is a court order freezing the joint accounts pending asset division. Mrs. Vey will have access to a supervised allowance for basic expenses. I stared at the papers, the legal language blurring through my tears. In one afternoon, Caleb had systematically dismantled my entire life. My marriage, my finances, my relationship with my daughter, even my ability to contact Elliot. Everything was now under legal control. How long have you been planning this? I whispered. Since the night I found you in that study, Caleb replied quietly. I gave you multiple opportunities to tell me the truth. You chose to continue lying instead. The mediator cleared her throat. Mrs. Vey, you have 30 days to review these documents and respond through legal counsel. In the meantime, the temporary orders go into effect immediately. As if on cue, there was a knock at the conference room door. A uniformed process server entered and placed a final set of papers in front of me. Thalassa Vey, you are hereby served with divorce papers and temporary restraining orders. The room fell silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's pen. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. My husband's cold calculation, his parents' disappointment, my sister's shame, the lawyer's professional detachment. I had walked into this room thinking I was attending a marriage counseling session. Instead, I had been formally served with the end of my life as I knew it, in front of everyone who mattered to me. Caleb stood up, gathering his papers with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. The apartment will be available for you to collect your personal belongings this weekend, supervised, of course. He paused at the door and looked back at me one final time. I want you to understand something, Thalassa. This isn't revenge. This is simply the natural consequence of the choices you made. Every document in that binder exists because of something you did. Every witness statement reflects your actions. Every financial record shows your decisions. I loved you, I said desperately. No, he replied quietly. You loved the security I provided and the freedom it gave you to pursue whatever else caught your attention. There's a difference. He walked out, followed by his parents and the legal team. The mediator gathered her papers and left with a sympathetic nod. Even Naomi slipped out with barely a word, unable to meet my eyes. I sat alone in the elegant boardroom, surrounded by legal documents that spelled out the complete destruction of my life. Outside, the rain continued to fall on a city that would soon know me only as another cautionary tale about a woman who had everything and threw it away for nothing. The court reporter finished her transcription and packed up her equipment. As she reached the door, she turned back. Ma'am, the session is concluded. You're free to go. But I wasn't free at all. I was trapped in a cage built from my own lies, and Caleb had simply provided the documentation.